Welcome to the Proceedings podcast. I'm Bill Hamblet, the editor-in-chief of Proceedings at the U.S. Naval Institute. Today is Friday, the 30th of June. Good to have you on board, everybody. As always, can't believe that 2023 is half over already. Man, it's gone by awfully quick. Today's show is brought to you by the members of the Naval Institute. Since 1873, the members of the Institute have been the foundation of everything we do, from Proceedings magazine to naval history to events and conferences to our professional books to USNI news. If you're not a member, become a member. Go to usni.org/join. And if you are a member, encourage a shipmate, a fellow Marine, a fellow Coastie to become a member today. All right. Well, joining me is my deputy and co-host, Bill Bray, coming online from his house in Annapolis. We're going to talk about a couple of things today. Really, the focus is to highlight the July issue of Proceedings, which will be live later today. So it's our annual naval aviation focus. We got an awesome cover there showing a shooter on board the Nimitz launching a Super Hornet just last month. The image taken, I think, in May or June of this year. So a very recent image. The July issue will be distroed at Tailhook. So we've switched up our production schedule a little bit. Usually Tailhook is in September and the aviation issue is our September issue. This year they moved Tailhook to August, which is always our Coast Guard issue. So we didn't want to throw out the Coast Guard because it's their birthday month. So we moved the aviation issue to July. And we'll be taking a couple thousand copies of the July issue out to Tailhook at the end of August in Reno to put in the bags of all the participants who come to Tailhook. So look forward to seeing a lot of folks, former shipmates and squadron mates at Tailhook at the end of August. Always a good show. And that's pretty much it to kind of kick things off. Bill, how's your week going?
Week's going well. It's it's a busy week. Yesterday, the Naval Academy had induction day, I-Day as we call it, and the Naval Institute was down there with many other organizations catering to the parents. It's an amazing thing to see. If anyone has a chance to witness one year, to watch these 1,200 or so young Americans come to the Naval Academy with their families and be sent off into the military, and that transformation, that first 24 hours, what happens to them, and then they're off and running. So plebe summer is in full swing here in Annapolis.
Yeah, indeed it is. And we'll have those, the plebes will start coming through the Naval Institute for an orientation of what we do, what we can do for them, what the Institute's all about, and the resources that we have for future naval officers. At the end of July and the first week of August, we get them come over in groups of about 100 at a time. Then we give a presentation to them in the Jack C. Taylor Conference Center. Always fun to do that and talk to the youngest members of the Naval Academy and the Navy officer clan. And it's just a little bit hard for me to believe that this is the class of 2027 that just entered. So they are 40 years younger than I am. So my class, and in fact, a couple of my classmates have sons and daughters in the class of 2027. So I've seen a lot of emails back and forth and Facebook posting about I-Day and about a couple of classmates who had a son or a daughter starting out their journey yesterday. Another thing that was happening this week that was very busy for us is the Modern Day Marine, which is the Marine Corps Association's annual big trade show. That was at the DC Convention Center, downtown Washington. The Naval Institute had a booth there. It was the first time we've had a booth at Modern Day Marine in recent years. And it was a great event, 3 days, lots of Marine Corps gear being displayed, speakers panels. There was I caught a panel on training and education in the Marine Corps. A couple of things that jumped out at me from that were, the Marine Corps at any given time, any given year has about a third of their force. So about 60,000 or so Marines will go through a training program or an education program in the course of a year. So they invest very heavily in training and educating Marines. And as the commanding general of Training and Education Command said, we train for tonight's fight, and we educate our Marines for the fight that might come 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the road. So that was a good one. There was also a panel on day 2 that included all the deputy commandants. So the deputy commandant for Manpower Reserve Affairs, the deputy commandant for programming and resources, the deputy commandant for combat development and integration, et cetera. And they were talking about Force Design 2030, about the plan that the Marine Corps has created, and then the budget that has resulted from that, and where they're going in terms of programmatics for the next couple of years. And then yesterday, the last speaker at the event was Assistant Commandant, soon to be, I'll cross my fingers there, but he's been confirmed by the Senate Armed Services Committee, and now is just waiting for full Senate approval. But General Eric Smith, who's the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps and should be the next Commandant of the Marine Corps, he spoke. He was the last speaker, and then he came over to our booth, and we did an episode of the podcast with him. So that will be posted sometime in the next couple of days. I've just got to post-produce it, but great conversation with him about manpower training, about talent management, really recruiting and retention. The Marines have got a good story to tell about retention. They're hitting their marks. They're actually exceeding their goals for retention, and they're quite pleased with that. So that was a great conversation. One of the things that I didn't hear that I wanted us to dig in and maybe get our news team to dig in on a little bit, there wasn't much conversation about connectors, ship-to-shore connectors, about the landing ship medium, about how you're going to get Marines from the L-class ships to the objective, whether that's a small island base of expeditionary base operations. That discussion, that topic didn't come up, and I didn't see companies exhibiting models of connectors. So that I think is a key piece of expeditionary advanced base operations that's got to be figured out quickly. And I want to hear some more about that. So anyway, as you pointed out, I-Day, busy day, busy week for the Naval Academy, modern day Marine, big thing for the Marines. And now we're going to just chat through some of the feature articles, although everything in the July issue is terrific. But some of the features that we were going to just highlight for our viewers and listeners today. So Bill, why don't you take the first one?
Hey, sure. In keeping with that Marine theme, Marine spirit, I'll start, even though this is the aviation issue, I'm going to start with an article we published by Sergeant Major Jake Reif, U.S. Marine Corps. Force modernization has arrived. Sergeant Major Reif is a board member. He's the enlisted board member on the Proceedings editorial board. He's down in Quantico. He's been very involved in Force Design 2030 and implementing it from a training and doctrine standpoint for several years. And I think he really harvests that experience to write this article. And it really is an excellent article. He spends some time in the early part of the article explaining that the Marine Corps has always innovated. It has always changed. And this is just another chapter in the Marine Corps story about innovation and changing to be best positioned for the nation. The key with this one is getting back to what they call their naval roots after 2 decades or so in kind of as a land army in Iraq and Afghanistan, which requires certain doctrine. It requires certain equipment, of course, and to come back out of that into a more naval focus requires quite a bit of change. General Berger has spearheaded this. As many know, it has not been uncontroversial. It has been highly emotional to the point that several retired Marine Corps generals, including a commandant, at least one, have been vocally opposed to it, which is very unusual, to come out and challenge the sitting commandant in public. But as Jake points out, we've worked our way through that. The debate is over, and we are moving out, and we're starting to see these changes really take root on how the Marine Corps is going to be. The young officers that were commissioned into the Marine Corps last month from here at the Naval Academy and elsewhere in the country are coming into a different Marine Corps than officers 15 years ago, 10 years ago came into. And this is the Marine Corps they're going to be in for their careers and the focus. So it's really an excellent article.
Yeah, it is. It's a good article, and it reinforces some of the things I heard at Modern Day Marine from seniors and also some mid-grade officers who one of the criticisms that's been thrown at force design was the divestment of tanks, right? And the counterpoint to that I heard from today's Marines at multiple different levels of command and rank was, you look at what's been going on in Russia, Ukraine, and you look at the number of tanks that have been destroyed on both sides by small unmanned air systems and air munitions, right? And the M1A1 tanks that the Marine Corps had that it would need to upgrade or replace with M1A2 tanks with defensive systems and capabilities that could protect against that vertical threat. This, either a little bomblet or, a number of different Javelin missiles or other missiles coming in at the turret at the top, attacking the tank. And you've seen this play out myriad times on international television, to change the tanks that the Marine Corps had and get tanks that could be protected from that capability would have made them a lot more expensive, a lot heavier, and a much harder to fit on the ship-to-shore connectors. Like, for example, the LCAC. The M1A2 tank would have been so heavy that an LCAC could not carry it. So there were some real reasons, nitty-gritty reasons that the Marine Corps said, we're going to divest from this capability. And they're bringing on some capabilities that are really kind of eye-watering. And as I heard from Jake, and I also heard from Lieutenant Colonel Scott Como, mention the fact that today's Marines are more lethal at 10 times the range that they were 5 years ago. So using some of these small UASs, using some standoff weapons that they've brought, using the Naval Strike Missile and the Nemesis system, they bring capabilities that the Marines of 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago could not have even imagined. So I'm pretty convinced, but Jake's article is a good one. We'll be interested to see what kind of feedback we get on that one. The next one, the one I wanted to mention, this is back to the aviation theme, is by a young officer, Josh Hanno. And it's Lieutenant Junior Grade Josh Hanno. He's in flight training right now. It's titled Envisioning a Multirole Future for the MQ25. And this idea that the MQ25 shouldn't just be an air refueling platform has been mentioned by others. Not just, the JG is not the first to come up with this idea that perhaps this unmanned refueling platform could do more. But what he does in this article that I think it won us over and our editorial board over is he looks at past naval aviation platforms that were built for one mission, perhaps ground attack, and that were expanded during the lifetime of those aircraft to take on new missions and do different things. So he brings out the example of the Grumman AF Guardian. Started as a torpedo bomber, but because through some variants, it ended up doing airborne ASW. There were two distinct variants that operated in a hunter-killer pair. He brings up the S3 Viking that started as an anti-submarine warfare platform, expanded to surface warfare platform expanded into the ES3, which was a signals intelligence platform, and had a lot of different capability. And then another example he gives is the Douglas A3 Sky Warrior, which was intended as a heavy bomber to carry nuclear weapons, and later turned out to be a tanker and an electronic countermeasures aircraft. So Lieutenant Hanno, points to the MQ-25 and says, hey, it's going to do some great things in terms of extending the range of the air wing, but there are lessons learned from the past of how naval aviation has adapted platforms to do other missions than what they were originally designed to. So I love that combination of history, particularly a JG, looking back at history, looking back, 50, 60 years over naval aviation adaptation and saying, here's some ways that, or some concrete lessons and programs that naval aviation today could apply to taking the MQ-25 forward from being an air refueler to being able to do a multitude of different things, including, ISR, including perhaps, an ASUW weapon or an ASW platform in terms of dropping sensors and things. So great piece, and I congratulate Lieutenant Hanno for that.
Yes, excellent. The agility of thinking that is required, the time it takes to get a program funded, built, fielded into the fleet. The world changes in that time frame, and the Navy and all the services need to be able to adapt the platforms they have that are in the program to different missions.
Exactly. What was the next one you wanted to discuss?
I just want to mention quickly, again, our heritage piece this month. And as we've mentioned in past podcasts, we're running an extra section in Proceedings, an extra 8-page section for the entire year of 2023, all 12 issues. Because this is the aviation issue, this is an Aviation Heritage article. We did a 100-year anniversary of carrier aviation article last September. So because we did that, which is very similar to these heritage pieces, we chose to focus this article on non-carrier aviation. And our eminence grise of Proceedings, Dennis Clift, went into the stacks, as they say, and dug out some awesome pieces. You could get lost in there. I could do that all day and not do my job. It starts with some of the very out of the box thinking about aviation very early in the early years, out of the box, and I would dare say quite dangerous experimentation they did in the early days, including man kites. If you don't know what a man kite is, open this article to the first page and stand by to be horrified that anybody actually volunteered to do this off the back of a ship hanging from a kite.
Think hang glider. So an aerial observer platform where you strap a person to a kite or a succession of kites and trail them behind a ship to look over the horizon. But yeah, it's a hair-raising story for sure.
Yeah, and then the Martin Mariner PBMs, the flying boats, and kind of our experience with that. A lot of experience, and many people, don't know this, but the U.S. Navy had Zeppelins, had lighter than air airships that were actually commissioned as USS ships, including, for example, the USS Los Angeles, that were used actually to pretty good effect toward the end of World War I and then later. And then getting into the 40s, you start seeing, some experimentation with helicopters. Okay, this was not really, the Korean War was the first time that the U.S. Navy used helicopters in kind of an operational role, where helicopters would go back and forth and do medevacs from Korea out to the ship, out to the hospital ships. This was a very new thing in the 1950s. And a little bit later, the exploration of the South Pole was very heavily, naval aviation was very heavily involved with that. Ski landing planes that could land on the ice down in Antarctica as they started to build McMurdo Station and some of the other bases down there, I guess bases or stations, to do Antarctic exploration. And then rounding out with like maritime patrol, starting with the P3's predecessor, and then mulching the P3, which had a long life in the Navy, 40 plus years, almost 50 years really, and until the P8 came online around 10, 12 years ago, started being fielded into the Navy.
Yeah, it's nice to highlight some things, and you'll see some, even for our carrier aviators, who of course are very focused on catapults and arrested landings. They'll recognize some names that have been important in their careers. So you'll see Moffett, for example, Admiral Moffett. There was Moffett Field for a long time. You see Softly, after which there's Softly Field down in Pensacola, and a few other notable names in the history of naval aviation, people that went on to become admirals, but you get to see what they did when they were ensigns and JGs and lieutenants, some of the daring do of the early days of naval aviation. Pretty neat stuff. Yeah. One more aviation article I want to talk about, and I want to have this author on the podcast in July, so I'm not going to steal too much of his thunder, but the special by Captain Tal Manville, and it's called The Lightning Carrier Isn't Either. So Tal is a passionate advocate for aircraft carriers, for CVNs, and he spent most of his career as an engineering duty officer. He was engineering officer on the USS America CV-66, not the current LHA. He was program manager for several refits of CVNs, and he was the first early program manager for the Ford class carrier. Tal is a guy who, every time he hears the term lightning carrier, it makes him cringe. Yeah, it sends him into conniptions. But this article is worth a read because it does ground you in some naval architecture facts, right? In terms of the size of a ship, the capabilities it brings, the layout and the design of the ship, what sea state does, what magazine capacity does. So, for example, he points out that some people have used an example that the USS Franklin CV-13 in World War II, was pummeled in Japanese attacks, and was not sunk. And so that size of a ship, 45,000 tons or so, is very survivable, and that we could build these sort of medium-sized carriers, non-nuclear powered, and that they could be effective, or maybe two of them could be as effective as a CVN. But Tal points out that the LHA, LHD class of today's Navy, while it might be about the same displacement, because of the way it's designed with a well deck, or with the ability to move Marines, in and out of the ship quickly, it doesn't have the internal design features and survivability features that even the World War II Franklin class ship had. And Tal has brought this up in the past, but another thing that folks will look back on during Operation Iraqi Freedom, the USS Bataan, there was a quote unquote Harrier carrier proof of concept, where the Bataan was, and its Harriers were conducting, strike operations into Iraq, as were, the CVNs and their carrier air wings. But Tal brings out the point, and I wasn't aware of this, that in order to conduct those strike operations, the Bataan, because it has a much smaller magazine on board for airborne munitions, they were essentially doing this Rube Goldberg sort of operation to bring munitions over to the Bataan using LCACs and using, I think it was even LCUs from the ammunition ship. and bringing them in through the well deck, and then moving them through the ship. So it not like being on a CVN where you've got massive magazines, more than 10 times the size of the magazines on the Baton or LHA, LHD, and moving them up to the flight deck, using elevators. But in this case, they were having to rearm almost every day using LCACs to bring ammunitions over from another ship, and then sort of hand moving them up to the flight deck on the Baton to arm the Harriers. So those are some really interesting points when we talk about, or folks talk about, well, we should just build more Lightning carriers that are the LHA, LHD class and put the F-35s. Great capability, but it does not bring the strike capability, the capacity, nor the survivability that you might think it would accompany it. So anyway, it's a great piece, and I want to have Tal on the show to explain that in more detail, because Tal's a naval architect. He taught naval architecture at the Naval Academy after he retired. He's a great guy, lives in Annapolis, and he's always fun to talk to. He's very very passionate about this topic, but that's a good one for our aviation issue.
Definitely. Let me just touch on a couple professional notes in the July issue. So to remind our readers, the professional note, which, by the way, have been in Proceedings. You can go back to 1880, 1878, whatever, the early years, and see professional notes in there. So this is a column that has been running for the duration of the 150 years publishing Proceedings. The professional notes are a little shorter, generally a little more technical, which can make them hard to edit, quite frankly, and a little more focused on a more discrete topic than a broader feature. So that's what they are. We generally run 3 per issue, with the exception of the Naval Review issue in March, where we don't run them. So there's 3 obviously in July, but let me just point out the first one I want to talk about is by Chief Warrant Officer Joshua Emery, about cryptologic warfare officers can no longer be generalists. So for those following along with the Navy information warfare story from its kind of incarnation in the late 2000s to then becoming a warfare community, and where it's going now, it's I would say struggled to find the sweet spot between this tension between specialization and generalists, but not just for cryptologic warfare officers, but for the other communities as well. I'll hold any opinion on where I think on it, but I will say that Josh Emery has made a pretty strong case that the cryptologic warfare officers can't just be broad across the different CW disciplines. They need to be focused not just more in one discipline, but also in one region. It's more of a regional specialization. You to know the cryptologic world from the Indo-Pacific is a skill that takes a long time to develop and is valued by the warfare commanders that are supported by cryptologic warfare. All right, the other professional note is by Commanders Dave Begay and Courtney Stiles Hurt, who goes by Stiles. Stiles was also a fellow for the Naval Institute and the Center for Strategic International Studies in the past year, and they wrote a good piece about maritime ISR weapons and tactics instructors. So, as our listeners know, I think that the weapons and tactics instructor program has expanded since it started, I don't know how many years ago, in the surface warfare community. And the idea here is that junior officers with strong records will then do a tour where they really get into the nitty-gritty of the tactical applications of their discipline. They'll get smart on it, and then they'll be used to mentor and train other junior officers and other senior enlisted, et cetera, at sea in their issues. It's been successful. I mean, success breeds success, and it's migrated to different communities. It's kind of like Top Gun, which actually probably precedes all of it, which is yeah.
That's where it started, really. It started with naval aviation and Top Gun, and then that became the WTI program, the Strike Fighter Weapons, the SWIFT program, right? Yeah.
So this version, this animal, this maritime ISR are the the officers that can, and they come from different communities. Some are aviators, some are intelligence officers, and so they kind of bring them together. But they get really smart on all the different kind of tactical ISR programs that the Navy has, both manned and unmanned, et cetera, and how to capture that information and integrate it operationally into the fight. So it's a nice piece.
Yeah, if you haven't heard that acronym MISR, that's how the Maritime ISR WTI program, but they call themselves the MISRs.
Yep.
Last one, because we're running out of time, but I wanted to mention a very weighty, heavy topic that's in the July issue that we, the staff, and also our editorial board went round and round on for a number of months. And the article is our American Sea Power Project article this month by Commander Retired Paul Giara. And it's titled "The Navy Needs Tactical Nuclear Weapons Again." And for folks of our age who were, ensigns and JGs at the end of the Cold War, will remember that the Navy on aircraft carriers and on surface ships and submarines, we had tactical nuclear weapons. We had air-dropped nuclear weapons on our, strike fighters and our attack aircraft. We had nuclear ASROC on surface ships and submarines. We had nuclear capable Tomahawks. And then when the Cold War ended and the Soviet Navy went home and sort of rusted at the pier for a while, the United States decided unilaterally to disarm and get rid of the tactical nuclear weapons in our Navy. And so by the early 1990s, those capabilities were largely gone from the Navy. And so the Navy nuclear weapons at sea now are, I think I want to say 100% the sub-launched ballistic missiles, the strategic nuclear triad arm. But in the last couple of years, our adversaries have been demonstrating that they are not out of the tactical nuclear weapons business at sea. And so the Russians really never got rid of that capability, although they had kept it at home and probably underplayed it a lot. The Chinese are rapidly building their nuclear arsenal. North Korea, of course, on an almost weekly basis, we see North Korean ICBM and SLBM tests, and we hear a lot about North Korea continuing to march forward in developing its nuclear weapons capabilities. And so Commander Giara argues that it's time for, unfortunately, it's time for the Navy to bring back tactical nuclear weapons. And he cites a couple of experts, including the former U.S. Strategic Command Commander, Admiral Charles Richard, who's now retired. But Admiral Richard, when he was the STRATCOM commander, was pretty public about the fact that if you don't have tactical nuclear weapons, you're missing rungs in your ladder of both escalation and de-escalation control. So if your only answer to an adversary nuclear weapon capability is either some pretty exquisite conventional weapons capabilities or strategic nuclear weapons, in other words, ICBMs coming from Montana or from ballistic missile submarines, you're missing out on capabilities that can help you control a situation or control or de-escalate or control escalation. That's the argument. And this is, a lot of people will I think, debate on this. There will probably be some pretty heated pushback on this article. But we decided that this was an important topic to have in the magazine to start the conversation again, because for the past 30 plus years now, the U.S. Navy has been out of the tactical nuclear weapons business, and yet our adversaries are moving in that direction at a pace. I would just say a pace. So important topic. I'm sure it's going to get some pushback. I'm sure we're going to get some letters on it. It'll be interesting to see how that debate plays out. But I encourage people to read it, really think about it, and see where you come out on the debate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but that's some of the highlights of the July aviation issue of Proceedings. It'll be posted online later today. So that today is June 30th. So that issue will go up live this afternoon. It'll be live over the 4th of July weekend. Until next episode, I wish everybody a happy, healthy, fun, safe Independence Day. Go USA. And to all the new plebes at the Naval Academy, work hard, row hard, young men and women, and it's all going to be good. We'll see you at the end of August or end of July and early August when you come over to Beach Hall for your Naval Institute briefings. Thanks for being on the show today, Bill.
All right. Thanks.
And thanks to Heather Legg, our producer, who makes all the magic happen behind the scene here.
Yes.
So until next episode, remember, victory begins at the Naval Institute.